I need to live for myself now. Those were the exact words that shattered everything I thought I knew about my marriage. And my response, sharp and unfiltered, was, "Not in my house, you won't." Looking back, that exchange wasn't just a fight. It was the moment that exposed years of hidden resentment, broken promises, and the stark truth about who we really were. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I never imagined that after nearly a decade of building a life together, my wife, Lila, would turn to me with such cold conviction and declare that her independence was more important than the vows we had spoken. But I also never imagined that I, a man who had always tried to bend and compromise for the sake of peace, would snap back with a line that would change the course of our lives. That night, I realized that sometimes the battle isn't between two people. It's between who you thought you were and who you're forced to become. It all started on an ordinary Tuesday evening in the quiet town of Easton, where routine had become the silent rhythm of our lives. I had just gotten home from work, tired but relieved, expecting the usual calm of dinner and small talk. Lila was already sitting at the kitchen table, a glass of red wine untouched in front of her, her eyes staring into it as though it held the answers she couldn't say out loud. Something about her posture, the rigid back, the clenched jaw, put me on edge instantly. I tried to ease into the moment. "Long day?" I asked, hanging my jacket over the chair. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she took a deep breath and finally lifted her gaze to mine. Her eyes weren't angry. They weren't sad either. They were resolved, like someone who had already rehearsed what they were about to say. That was the first clue that what she was about to tell me had been brewing for far longer than I realized. "I can't do this anymore, Mark," she said, her voice even and deliberate. "I feel like I've been living for everyone else but myself. For you, for the kids, for my parents, expectations. I need to live for myself now." At first, I thought I had misheard her. Live for herself? What did that even mean when we had built a life together? When every decision we made had been entwined in the fabric of us? My confusion quickly turned to disbelief, then to anger. I didn't recognize the woman sitting across from me, speaking like a stranger who had already packed her bags in her head. And that's when the words spilled out of me before I could stop them. "Not in my house, you won't." The silence that followed was deafening. She stared at me as though I had just confirmed every reason she felt trapped, every justification for her declaration. But for me, it wasn't about control. It wasn't about ownership. It was about the betrayal of watching someone throw away a life we had sacrificed so much to build, all under the guise of personal freedom. The weight of that night pressed on me long after she walked away from the table and locked herself in the bedroom. I sat alone in the kitchen, the hum of the refrigerator filling the void, trying to piece together where everything had gone wrong. Had I missed the signs? Had I been so consumed by work and responsibility that I failed to see her slowly slipping away from the marriage? Or had she simply decided, quietly and without warning, that our life wasn't enough anymore? As I sat there, I thought back to when we first met. Lila was radiant, full of laughter and ambition, the kind of woman who lit up a room without even trying. I was drawn to her confidence, her independence, the way she spoke about her dreams of traveling, of writing, of building something meaningful out of life. But somewhere along the way, those dreams seemed to dim, replaced by the practical demands of bills, kids, and the grind of daily survival. I thought we had chosen that together. I thought that was the price of building a stable home. Yet here she was, looking at me like I had stolen her from herself. That night, as I replayed our argument over and over, a sickening thought gnawed at me. Maybe she hadn't just decided this overnight. Maybe she had been quietly resenting me for years, biting her tongue while her discontent grew into something irreversible. The realization felt like a punch to the gut. I wanted to believe that we could fix it, that with enough talks or counseling or effort, we could find our way back. But there was something final in the way she said those words. It wasn't a plea, it wasn't a threat. It was a declaration. And declarations have a way of drawing lines in the sand. By the time the clock struck midnight, I knew our marriage had shifted into uncharted territory. The woman I thought I knew wasn't the same, and the man she saw sitting across from her wasn't enough anymore. I wasn't sure what the coming days would bring, but one thing was certain. The home that once felt like our safe haven was about to become a battleground of identity, freedom, and the unspoken cost of promises broken. Before everything started to unravel, my life could have been described in one word: predictable. I wasn't the kind of man chasing after thrills or desperate for the next big adventure. I found comfort in routine, in the structure of family dinners, weekend errands, and the steady rhythm of a job that paid the bills. I believed that stability was the backbone of happiness, and for the longest time I thought my wife agreed with me. My name is Mark Holloway, and for 9 years I had built my identity around being a husband, a father, and a provider. Those roles defined me more than anything else. I worked as an operations manager at a shipping company in Easton, and though the work was grueling and often thankless, it gave me a sense of pride. I wasn't out there changing the world, but I was ensuring that my family never had to worry about having food on the table or a roof over their heads. I would wake up every morning at 5:30, brew a pot of coffee strong enough to wake the dead, and head out into traffic before the sun fully rose. By the time I returned home, the house was buzzing with the chaos of dinner, homework, and bedtime routines. It wasn't glamorous, but to me, it was everything. Lila, my wife, had been a kindergarten teacher before our children were born. After our first child, Sophie, came into the world, she decided to stay home, at least until both kids were older. Later, when our second child, Ethan, was born, the plan extended. I supported her fully, never once questioning the decision, because in my mind, raising our children was the most important job of all. Money was tight at times, but I always believed that sacrifices made for family were investments in the future. Lila had once dreamed of traveling, writing, and doing more than just settling into the domestic role. I thought those dreams had evolved into a shared vision of family life. Our house wasn't big or fancy, but it was ours. A 3-bedroom, single-story home with a small garden in the back where Lila grew herbs and tomatoes. She took pride in that garden, and I took pride in mowing the lawn every weekend, making sure the place looked neat. Our living room was filled with mismatched furniture, hand-me-downs from relatives, and pictures of our kids plastered across the walls. We had Sunday rituals, too: pancakes in the morning, followed by an afternoon drive to the park or the lake. These were the moments I held on to, the ones that made all the long hours at work worth it. I wasn't oblivious to the fact that our lives weren't perfect. There were arguments, of course, disagreements about money, parenting, and the fact that we rarely had time for just the two of us anymore. But I thought those were normal struggles every married couple faced. I believed that love wasn't about grand gestures or constant fireworks. It was about showing up, day after day, even when things weren't easy. I thought that by being steady, dependable, and loyal, I was giving Lila everything she needed. I valued tradition. I grew up in a household where my parents stayed together through thick and thin, even when times were hard. My father was a quiet man, much like me, who worked long hours and rarely complained. My mother held the household together with discipline and care. They weren't overly affectionate, but they showed love through consistency. That was my blueprint for marriage, and I carried it into my own. To me, a successful relationship wasn't about passion burning endlessly. It was about commitment and the quiet comfort of knowing you weren't going to wake up one day and find your partner gone. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Friends would sometimes tease me about how settled I had become. They'd talk about vacations, hobbies, new business ventures, or risky investments, while I'd talk about Sophie's spelling bee or Ethan's soccer practice. I didn't mind. I wasn't looking for excitement. My joy came from the small, steady things. Walking through the front door to hear my kids shout, "Daddy!" Or sitting with Lila on the porch after the kids were asleep, sipping iced tea in the summer air. That was happiness to me. I admit, though, there were moments when I sensed something shifting in Lila. She would get quiet during those porch talks, staring into the distance as if her mind was somewhere else. When I asked, she'd brush it off, saying she was just tired. Sometimes I'd find her scrolling through travel blogs on her phone, or watching videos of people documenting their lives abroad. I'd laugh and tell her, "Maybe when the kids are older we'll take a big trip," and she'd smile, but it never reached her eyes. I chalked it up to wistfulness, nothing more. Still, my world was one of responsibilities, and I wore that like a badge of honor. I saw myself as the anchor, the one who kept the ship steady, no matter how rough the waters got. I never considered what it might feel like to be the one tethered, to look at life and see only the weight of obligations without the freedom to explore. I didn't see it because, in my heart, I believed that was the price we both willingly paid when we said our vows. In the weeks leading up to that fateful night, there had been no dramatic arguments, no explosive confrontations, just the quiet hum of life as usual. I went to work. She took care of the kids and the house. We had dinner together. We watched the occasional show before bed. I had no reason to believe that beneath the surface something inside her was shifting so drastically. That's why her words blindsided me. When she said she needed to live for herself, it wasn't just a statement of desire. It was a rejection of everything I thought we had built together. And while my life had been defined by predictability and order, hers had clearly been defined by a longing I didn't fully understand. Back then, though, before the cracks revealed themselves, I believed with absolute certainty that our marriage was solid. I believed that my role as provider, protector, and partner was enough. I believed that the life we shared, ordinary as it was, had meaning that neither of us would ever question. I didn't realize how wrong I was. Long before the kitchen table confrontation that would split our lives in two, there was a time when just hearing Lila's laugh could brighten my entire week. I still remember the first time I saw her, though it feels like a different lifetime now. It was a spring afternoon, and I had been reluctantly dragged by a coworker to a friend's small gathering at a local art exhibit in Easton. I wasn't the type to mingle at those events. I was a man of routines, not of wine glasses and abstract paintings. But when I walked into that gallery and heard her voice across the room, something in me paused, as if my whole body knew before my mind could catch up that this woman would change everything. She was standing near a painting of a sunrise over a forest, her hair catching the light in a way that made her seem like part of the canvas itself. She was animated, gesturing with her hands as she spoke to a group of people, and when she laughed, the sound was so full of life it pulled me toward her without hesitation. I don't even remember what line I used to introduce myself. I just remember how she looked at me, curious, amused, like she was willing to let me step into her orbit. Lila was unlike anyone I had met before. She was open, vibrant, endlessly curious about the world. Within the first 20 minutes of conversation, she told me about her dream of backpacking across Europe, writing essays about the people she would meet, and maybe even publishing a memoir one day. I was captivated, not just by her beauty, but by her ability to see life as something bigger, something to be embraced with both hands. At that point in my life, I was practical, cautious, even a little closed off. Meeting her felt like opening a window in a stuffy room. We started dating not long after that. Our early days were filled with long walks around town, late-night conversations that stretched until dawn, and spontaneous adventures that felt out of character for me but completely natural with her. She had this way of pulling me out of my shell, of making me see that there was more to life than just going to work and coming home. I wasn't the kind of man who chased excitement, but with her, I found myself saying yes more than no. Yes to weekend trips. Yes to dancing in the living room. Yes to trying new foods at hole-in-the-wall restaurants she insisted we visit. I think that's part of what made me fall so hard for her. She embodied the kind of freedom and lightness that I secretly wished I had. At the same time, I think she was drawn to the stability and calm I represented. While she was a whirlwind of energy, I was the steady ground she could land on. Back then, it felt like the perfect balance, like we complemented each other in ways that would make us stronger together than apart. Still, even in those early days, there were subtle differences between us that I brushed aside. She would talk about living in different countries, exploring the world, and pursuing creative projects, while I would gently steer the conversation toward practical plans, jobs, savings, long-term security. I thought she would grow out of her wanderlust, and she thought I would grow into her sense of adventure. Neither of us said it outright, but those expectations were there, quietly waiting for the years to test them. Our love grew quickly, and before long we were inseparable. Friends would comment on how natural we seemed together, how we looked at each other like no one else was in the room. I held on to that, convinced that it was proof we were meant to last. After about a year of dating, I proposed to her on a quiet evening at the lake where we used to go for walks. I didn't have an elaborate plan or a fancy ring. I simply knelt down on the dock, my voice trembling, and asked her to be my wife. Her eyes lit up, and when she said yes, I felt like the luckiest man alive. Our wedding wasn't extravagant. It was a modest ceremony at a small chapel, surrounded by close family and friends. I remember the way she walked down the aisle, her smile radiant, her presence filling the room. I remember thinking that whatever challenges life threw at us, we would face them together. That promise felt unshakable at the time. In the first couple of years of marriage, we lived in a small apartment above a bakery. It was cramped, noisy, and sometimes smelled like burnt bread, but to us, it was perfect. We didn't have much money, but we had each other, and that felt like enough. Lila was still teaching back then, and I was working long hours, trying to climb the ladder at my company. Our schedules didn't always align, but we made time for each other. Friday nights became our ritual: pizza, a movie, and falling asleep on the couch in each other's arms. There were small cracks even then, though I didn't see them for what they were. She would sometimes come home talking about a colleague who had just returned from a trip abroad, and I'd notice the longing in her voice. She'd mention wanting to write again, but then sigh about how tired she was from work. I would reassure her that one day we'd have the means to do all those things, that for now we just needed to focus on building a foundation. She always nodded, but deep down I think she was storing those dreams away in a box she thought she'd open later. Looking back, I realized that those were the moments when our differences were quietly establishing themselves. She wanted the world, and I wanted stability. At the time, I thought love was enough to bridge that gap. I thought that by providing her with a home, security, and loyalty, she would never feel the absence of the things she once craved. I was wrong, but back then, it didn't matter. Back then, all that mattered was that we had found each other, and for a while, that was more than enough. The years after our wedding felt like a golden stretch of time, a period where everything seemed to fall into place, even if only temporarily. We weren't rich, and we certainly weren't living out the kinds of dreams Lila used to talk about when we were dating. But what we did have felt steady, warm, and real. There's a particular kind of joy in waking up next to the person you love and believing wholeheartedly that your futures are bound together. For a long while, that was the air I breathed every single day. Our first real milestone as a couple came when we managed to buy our house. It wasn't easy. We saved every extra dollar for years, cutting corners where we could, denying ourselves luxuries others took for granted. Vacations were replaced with staycations, nights out became home-cooked meals, and we drove our used sedan until the wheels practically threatened to give out. But when we finally signed the papers for that little 3-bedroom home with the creaky floorboards and the small patch of backyard, it felt like conquering the world. I remember carrying Lila over the threshold, both of us laughing like kids, our voices echoing against the empty walls. She kissed me then and said, "This is the beginning, Mark." Our beginning. Not long after moving in, we welcomed Sophie into the world. I had never been so terrified or so in awe in my life. Holding that tiny baby in my arms, her eyes blinking up at me, I felt a kind of love I hadn't known was possible. Lila glowed in those first months of motherhood, her exhaustion hidden behind the joy of cradling Sophie, singing to her softly in the middle of the night. I used to watch her from the doorway, amazed by the tenderness in her face, the fierce protectiveness in her every gesture. For a while, it felt like our love had expanded into something greater than ourselves, something eternal. Ethan came a few years later, and with him came a whole new layer of chaos and happiness. Our house was no longer quiet, but alive with laughter, cries, toys scattered across the floor, and walls that seemed to absorb the noise of family life. I would come home from work to find Sophie running into my arms, Ethan toddling behind her, both of them competing for my attention while Lila laughed from the kitchen. Those were the moments that sustained me, the snapshots of pure happiness that I believed would carry us through anything. Lila and I had our share of challenges, of course. Sleepless nights, financial pressures, the strain of raising 2 young kids while I worked long hours. All of it tested us. But even in the midst of that exhaustion, there was a kind of unspoken teamwork between us. I'd wake up early on weekends to make breakfast so she could sleep in. She'd pack lunches with little notes tucked inside for me when I had especially long days ahead. We weren't perfect, but we loved each other in the small, ordinary ways that mattered most. There were seasons when everything seemed to glow. Summers spent at the lake, where Sophie learned to swim and Ethan built sandcastles. Lila watching them with a smile so wide it made me think of our early days together. Winters when we bundled up by the fireplace, the kids huddled between us as we watched old movies. Spring afternoons in the garden, where she taught the children how to plant seeds and nurture them into life while I grilled dinner on the back patio. These moments weren't glamorous, but they were ours, and for a long time I truly believed they were enough. One of the highlights of our marriage was a trip we took to the mountains when Sophie was 5 and Ethan was 3. We rented a small cabin, nothing fancy, just a wooden place tucked away among towering pines. There was no internet, no TV, just us, a fireplace, and miles of trails to explore. I remember Lila's laughter echoing through the trees as Sophie tried to skip rocks across a lake, Ethan squealing as I lifted him onto my shoulders. That trip felt like the embodiment of everything I thought our marriage stood for: family, love, and the simple joy of being together. There were also moments just for us, even amid the busyness of parenting. Every year on our anniversary, we'd find a way to sneak away for at least one night. Sometimes it was just a small inn a few towns over, but it always felt special. Those nights were when we reconnected, when we remembered who we were before the titles of mom and dad consumed us. I would look across the table at her, the candlelight flickering in her eyes, and feel the same pull I had when I first met her. I never doubted her love then. It wasn't only about romance, though. Lila was my partner in everything. She celebrated every promotion I earned, cheered me on when I doubted myself, and believed in me even when I didn't. I, in turn, admired her dedication as a mother, the way she gave her whole self to raising our kids, creating a home filled with warmth. We shared responsibilities, dreams, and countless late-night talks about the future. For a long time, those talks were filled with optimism. Looking back now, I can see that maybe I was blinded by how good those years felt. I didn't notice the way her dreams were changing, or how mine stayed the same. I thought the love we shared and the family we built were enough to fill whatever spaces were left inside her. And during those years, the good times, they seemed to be. There's a photo that sits in an old album on a dusty shelf in the closet. It's from a 4th of July barbecue we hosted one summer. Lila is sitting at the picnic table, Sophie on her lap, Ethan perched on the bench beside her. She's looking at me, smiling in a way that still takes my breath away when I see it. That smile was real, unguarded, full of love. And every time I look at that photo, I can't help but wonder when exactly that smile began to fade, and how I missed it happening. But during those good times, I wasn't thinking about what could go wrong. I was living in the glow of a life I thought was solid, unshakable. I believed we had everything we needed, that the love we built and the family we cherished would carry us through any storm. And for a while, it did. The unraveling of a marriage doesn't usually begin with explosions or ultimatums. It starts with whispers, with little shifts so subtle you hardly notice them until they've built into something undeniable. For me, the first warning signs weren't dramatic arguments or slammed doors. They were quiet moments, almost invisible, that left me with a lingering unease I couldn't quite explain. It began with the silences. Lila used to be talkative, always filling the room with stories about her day, the children, or some article she had read online. She'd sit across from me at dinner, animated, her hands moving as she spoke about everything, from a funny moment at the park with Ethan to some reflection on a book she was reading. But then, little by little, she grew quieter. Some evenings, I would come home to find her sitting at the table, scrolling through her phone, barely acknowledging me when I walked in. I'd ask about her day, and she would answer with 1 or 2 words, her eyes never lifting from the screen. At first, I chalked it up to exhaustion. Parenting 2 kids while managing a household wasn't easy, and I figured she was simply drained. But the silences stretched further. Nights that used to be filled with conversation turned into evenings of her retreating early to bed with a book, while I stayed in the living room watching television alone. I told myself it was just a phase, that she needed space to rest and recharge, but deep down I felt the distance growing. Then came the changes in her routines. Lila had always been consistent, organized, deliberate, a woman of schedules. She liked to plan meals for the week, keep the kids on a structured bedtime, and spend Saturday mornings in the garden. But slowly, those routines began to slip. She stopped planning meals, opting instead for quick takeout or leaving it to me to figure out dinner when I got home. The garden, once her pride and joy, grew overrun with weeds. When I asked if she wanted to spend time outside tending to it like she used to, she shrugged and said, "It just doesn't matter anymore." Her appearance changed too, in ways that caught me off guard. Lila had never been overly concerned with fashion. She was naturally beautiful and she carried herself with quiet confidence. But she began buying new clothes, outfits that seemed more suited for nights out than afternoons at home with the kids. She started wearing makeup more often, even if she wasn't going anywhere. I noticed perfumes on her dresser I hadn't seen before, scents that clung faintly to her when she passed me in the hallway. When I asked about it, she laughed lightly and said, "Every woman needs a change sometimes." I nodded, but the knot in my stomach tightened. Perhaps the most telling shift was in her attention to me. It wasn't that she was hostile or cold, it was that she seemed indifferent. The small gestures of affection that once came so naturally between us disappeared. She stopped reaching for my hand when we sat together. She no longer leaned in for a kiss when I came home from work. Even our conversations about the kids began to feel transactional, like we were co-workers managing a project rather than partners raising a family. One evening I tried to bridge the gap. After the kids had gone to bed, I poured us each a glass of wine and sat down with her on the couch. "You've seemed distant lately," I said carefully. "Is something wrong?" She didn't look at me right away. Instead, she sipped her wine and stared at the television, which wasn't even turned on. Finally, she said, "I don't know. I just feel tired, like I've lost a part of myself somewhere along the way." Her words unsettled me, but I brushed them aside with reassurance. "It's normal to feel that way sometimes," I told her. "Life is busy, and it wears us down. But we're in this together. You haven't lost yourself. You've built something incredible here, with the kids, with me." She smiled faintly, but it didn't reach her eyes. That should have been the moment I pressed harder, asked more questions, really listened. Instead, I let it go, convinced that she'd bounce back. As months passed, the small cracks widened. She began spending more time away from the house. She said she needed breaks, time to herself, so she started going on long walks in the evenings. At first, I supported it. I knew motherhood was demanding, and I wanted her to feel like she had space to breathe. But the walks grew longer, stretching late into the night. Sometimes she'd come back hours after the kids were asleep, her face unreadable, her explanations vague. "I just needed to think," she'd say, and head straight to the bedroom. I started noticing the way she lit up in conversations with others, especially when we were at gatherings with friends. Around me, she was reserved, subdued, but when she was talking with someone else, her laughter returned, her energy came alive. It stung to realize that the version of her I fell in love with still existed. It just wasn't directed at me anymore. The first real argument sparked one Saturday afternoon when I suggested we take the kids to the lake like we used to. "I don't want to," she said flatly, folding laundry without looking at me. "Why not?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. "The kids love it, and we haven't gone in months." She dropped a towel into the basket and finally met my eyes. "Because I don't want to keep doing the same things over and over, Mark. I need something different." Her tone wasn't angry, but it was firm. That was the first time I truly felt the wedge between us, and I didn't know how to close it. Looking back, the warning signs were everywhere, each one a quiet signal that the foundation we had built was beginning to shift, but at the time I refused to see them for what they were. I told myself it was stress, exhaustion, maybe even just a phase. I clung to the memory of the good times, convincing myself that we would find our way back. But the truth was, we were already drifting apart, and neither of us had the courage to admit it out loud. What started as faint whispers of distance soon swelled into a storm I couldn't ignore. By this point, I wasn't dealing with the occasional silence or skipped family outing anymore. I was staring down an entirely different rhythm of life with Lila, one that seemed less like partnership and more like coexistence. Each day felt heavier, and the fragile thread that tied us together frayed a little more with every passing week. The first major escalation came in the form of her absences. At first, it was the long evening walks that sometimes stretched late into the night, but then those walks became outings. She started telling me she was going to meet friends, though I rarely knew who they were. Sometimes she mentioned a book club, other times a yoga class, but when I asked if I could come along or if I could meet the people she spent so much time with, she brushed me off with vague excuses. "You wouldn't enjoy it," she'd say with a dismissive wave, or, "It's just for me, I need this space." The way she emphasized me made my stomach twist. Her relationship with the kids began to shift too. Lila had always been a hands-on mother, deeply involved in every part of their lives. She used to sit with Ethan while he worked on his science projects or read to Clara before bed, but increasingly she seemed detached. She'd let me handle bedtime routines, brushing it off by saying she was too tired or had something else she needed to do. When Ethan asked her if she'd come watch his soccer practice, she promised she would, but then didn't show up. He looked for her in the stands, and when he realized she wasn't there, his face fell in a way that broke me. That night, when I brought it up to her, she shrugged. "I'll catch the next one," but the next one never came. The tension between us at home grew thicker, filling every room like a fog. Conversations became strained, and when we did talk, they often dissolved into arguments. It wasn't screaming matches. It was worse than that. It was cold, clipped exchanges, sharp enough to cut but too restrained to resolve anything. One night, after another long silence at dinner, I finally asked her directly, "What's going on, Lila? You barely talk to me, you barely talk to the kids, and you're always gone. What's happening?" She set her fork down with deliberate care and looked at me across the table. "I feel trapped, Mark. That's what's happening. Every day feels like the same routine, the same responsibilities, and I don't know who I am anymore. I need something more than this." Her words stung, not just because of what she said, but because of how she said it. Calm, as though she had been rehearsing the lines in her head for weeks. I tried to reason with her, to remind her of the life we had built, the family we created, the love that once bound us. "This is our life," I said. "It's not perfect, but it's ours. And it matters. You matter to us." She looked at me with eyes that seemed distant, almost attached. But what if it's not enough for me anymore? That conversation opened a floodgate. From then on, everything seemed like a battle. She questioned everything I suggested, from how we spent weekends to how we managed money. She accused me of being controlling when I asked where she was going. She rolled her eyes when I suggested we see a counselor, saying, "You think some stranger is going to fix this? I don't think you understand. I don't want to be fixed." That word, fixed, echoed in my head long after she said it. Meanwhile, my own stress began to mount. I was trying to keep up with work, manage the kids, schedules, and hold together the crumbling pieces of our marriage. I found myself staying late at the office just to avoid going home to the tension-filled silence. Even the kids began to notice. Clara asked me one night, "Why does Mommy always look sad?" And I didn't know how to answer. How could I explain to a 7-year-old that her mother was slipping away from all of us? The financial strain added another layer of pressure. Lila started spending more money on herself. New clothes, weekend retreats she claimed were for self-discovery, classes she never mentioned before. Our credit card statements grew heavier each month, and when I confronted her about it, she snapped. "Don't police me, Mark. I deserve to do something for myself for once." I tried to point out that we had responsibilities, that the kids' needs had to come first, but she shot back, "And what about my needs? Do those not matter at all?" It was as if we were speaking different languages, unable to find common ground. The intimacy between us evaporated completely. We went from being affectionate partners to nothing more than roommates. Nights passed with her sleeping on the far side of the bed, her back turned to me, her phone glowing in her hands long after I had turned off my light. I wondered sometimes who she was texting so late, but I didn't have the energy to ask. The trust between us had been eroded to such a degree that even the thought of questioning her felt futile. It was during this period that I realized something chilling. I was no longer fighting to fix our marriage. I was fighting just to hold on to the illusion that we still had one. Each day, it became harder to deny the truth staring me in the face. That Lila wasn't just pulling away. She was already gone in every way that mattered, even if she was still physically under our roof. The problems had escalated beyond what I thought possible. What had once been small cracks were now wide chasms. What had once been silence was now a wall. And no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't reach her on the other side. By the time things had deteriorated into cold silences and clipped arguments, I was carrying the weight of our fractured marriage almost entirely on my own shoulders. I hadn't told many people about the turmoil brewing at home, partly because I was embarrassed, and partly because I kept hoping I could fix it quietly. But even though I tried to put on a brave face, cracks began to show in my own demeanor. People close to me could see something wasn't right, and it wasn't long before those around me began to step in and provide the perspective I was too deep inside the storm to see. It was my sister Hannah who first voiced what I had been too afraid to admit out loud. She came over one Sunday afternoon to drop off some things for the kids and stayed for coffee. Lila was out, claiming she needed, quote, time for herself, which had become her standard explanation for her long absences. As Hannah and I sat at the kitchen table, she looked around the room with a frown. The kids were sprawled on the living room floor, quietly playing with their toys. The atmosphere felt heavy, and I guess it was obvious. "Mark," she said gently, "are you okay? You've seemed, I don't know, worn down lately." I hesitated, swirling my coffee, unsure if I wanted to open the floodgates, but something in her expression made me feel safe enough to let a little truth slip out. "Things haven't been easy," I admitted. "Lila's been distant. She's different. I don't know what's going on anymore." Hannah's eyes softened, but there was also a sharpness in her voice. "I've noticed," she said quietly. "Every time I've been here lately, she's either leaving or avoiding us. And when she is around, it feels like she doesn't want to be here. Mark, you don't deserve to carry all this alone. Something isn't right." Her words landed like both a relief and a wound. Part of me felt validated, like I wasn't imagining the shift, but another part of me hated that someone else had noticed the unraveling of what I was trying so desperately to keep together. Later that week, I confided in my coworker, Ryan, who had always been more of a friend than just a colleague. Over a late lunch, I found myself venting, telling him how Lila had started spending more money, how she was gone for hours without explanation, how she barely interacted with the kids anymore. Ryan leaned back in his chair, his brow furrowed. "Man, that's not just stress, that's her checking out. You can't keep carrying this like it's your fault." He didn't say it with pity. He said it with the blunt honesty of someone who had seen enough life to know when things weren't adding up. Even my mother, who rarely involved herself in my personal matters, spoke up during one of her visits. She had come by to see the kids and noticed the lack of warmth between Lila and me. After Lila left abruptly to run errands, my mother turned to me with that mix of maternal concern and bluntness only a parent can wield. "She's not here, Mark," she said softly. "Not really. I don't know what she's chasing, but it's not this family. And you can't ignore it forever." Those conversations shook me because they echoed the nagging doubts already gnawing at me in the quiet hours of the night. For so long, I had convinced myself that I was overreacting, that maybe I was being too sensitive or too demanding. But now, hearing it reflected back by people who loved me and had no reason to exaggerate, I realized I wasn't imagining it. Lila truly was pulling away, and the damage wasn't just in my head. It was visible to everyone around us. The hardest blow came when Ethan, my 10-year-old son, unknowingly became another voice of validation. One night, as I tucked him into bed, he looked at me with wide, worried eyes and asked, "Dad, does Mom still love us?" My heart clenched. "Of course she does," I said quickly, but the words caught in my throat. Ethan frowned, clearly unconvinced. "She doesn't come to my games anymore. She doesn't even sit with us at dinner. She's always gone." His voice wavered, and I had to fight back my own tears. In that moment, it wasn't just me feeling the absence. My children were living it too. I began to lean more on the people around me, slowly shedding the shame of admitting that my marriage was unraveling. Hannah checked in regularly, sometimes showing up unannounced just to make sure I wasn't drowning in it all. Ryan would drag me out for lunch, urging me to take care of myself instead of burying everything in work. Even my mother, in her quiet way, offered small gestures of support, dropping off home-cooked meals, spending extra time with the kids so I could catch my breath. Their voices became a mirror I couldn't avoid. They reminded me that the situation wasn't just a temporary rough patch, it was a pattern of abandonment. And while their support comforted me, it also forced me to confront the truth I had been running from. This wasn't sustainable. I couldn't keep protecting Lila's choices or downplaying the reality. I wasn't alone in seeing it anymore, and the more people pointed it out, the harder it became to cling to denial. What stung most was that every validation I received from others made me feel both stronger and lonelier at the same time. Stronger, because I knew I wasn't crazy. Lonelier, because it underlined how far gone Lila already was. The love and support from my circle became both a safety net and a spotlight, showing me just how much had already slipped through my fingers. Rock bottom didn't come with a single thunderclap moment. It came like a slow landslide, gathering weight until it crushed me completely. By this point, weeks of tension and absence had become our new normal, but somewhere in the haze of broken promises and cold silences, there was one night that stripped away any remaining denial. It was a Friday evening, one of those days when the kids had been buzzing with excitement all week because I promised to take them to their favorite diner for burgers and milkshakes. I came home early from work, eager to give them a night that felt light and normal amidst all the heaviness. Lila was supposed to come too, at least that's what she had said earlier in the week when Ethan asked if she'd join us. But when I walked into the house, she was dressed up in an outfit I hadn't seen before, makeup fresh. Her perfume so strong it lingered in every corner of the hallway. "Where are you going?" I asked carefully, setting down my bag. "Out," she replied flatly, grabbing her purse from the counter. "With us? Remember the diner tonight?" I tried to keep my voice steady, hoping maybe she had just forgotten. She looked at me with annoyance, almost like I was inconveniencing her. "No, Mark. I need to go out. I need my own life outside of this house. You take the kids." Ethan, who had been standing nearby with his soccer cap in hand, heard every word. His little shoulders slumped as he muttered, "It's fine, Dad. Let's just go." That moment carved itself into my chest like a scar. Watching my son lower his expectations of his mother so easily, like it had become routine, was the kind of pain that left me hollow. We went to the diner anyway. I forced a smile, joked with Clara about her extra whipped cream, and listened to Ethan talk about his science project. But inside, I was unraveling. The empty space where Lila should have been at that table wasn't just a seat. It was a void that swallowed every ounce of hope I had been clinging to. I looked across at my children and realized with piercing clarity that they were learning, day by day, what it meant to normalize absence. And I couldn't let that continue. When we got home, the house was dark, and Lila was still gone. I put the kids to bed, lingered by their doors longer than usual, and then went to sit in the living room. Hours passed. The clock ticked toward midnight, and then past it. My phone stayed silent. I stared at the family pictures on the wall, the smiles, the vacations, the birthdays, and it all felt like a museum exhibit from another lifetime. Eventually, I heard the front door creak open, and Lila walked in, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor. She didn't look at me, didn't offer an explanation. She just went straight upstairs. Something inside me broke then, not with rage, but with a chilling calm. For the first time, I saw things exactly as they were. This wasn't a rough patch, this wasn't stress or exhaustion. This was abandonment, one slow act at a time. Lila wasn't my partner anymore. She was a ghost who still lived under my roof, haunting every corner of our lives without ever being truly present. The next morning, the final straw came in the form of a conversation I hadn't been ready for. Clara, sweet and innocent, climbed onto the couch beside me while I was sipping my coffee. She looked at me with her big eyes and asked, "Daddy, is Mommy mad at us? Is that why she doesn't stay home anymore?" I nearly choked on my drink. "No, honey," I said quickly, pulling her close. "Mommy isn't mad at you, she loves you very much." But the words felt like ash in my mouth. How long could I keep feeding them lies to protect them from a truth that was cutting us all open? That day, as I went through the motions of laundry, dishes, and grocery lists, I carried that question like a stone in my chest. By evening, when Lila breezed in again without explanation, I didn't even confront her. I didn't need to. Something in me had shifted permanently. I wasn't waiting for answers anymore. I wasn't trying to drag her back into the marriage. I was standing in the ruins, and I finally understood that no amount of effort on my part could rebuild something she had already walked away from in her heart. The realization brought a mix of grief and clarity. I grieved for the life we had built, for the family dinners, for the simple comfort of knowing that when I came home, I had a partner who was glad to see me. But alongside the grief came a strange, unshakable certainty. I couldn't live like this anymore. Not for me, and not for my children. That night, as I lay awake staring at the ceiling, Lila asleep beside me with her back turned as always, I whispered to myself the truth I had been avoiding for months. It's over. It's really over. Saying it, even quietly in the dark, was like opening a door I had been afraid to touch. The air felt different, sharper, but also cleaner. For the first time in months, I wasn't tangled in the knots of denial. I was staring at the raw truth, and it hurt, but it also gave me something solid to stand on. Rock bottom wasn't just the moment of realizing what I had lost. It was the moment of realizing that I had to stop trying to hold on to something that no longer existed. That clarity, as devastating as it was, became the turning point I didn't know I needed. The morning after that sleepless night, I woke with a weight in my chest but also with a clarity I hadn't felt in months. For so long I had been stumbling through the fog of confusion and denial, trying to preserve the image of a marriage that no longer existed. But now, after hitting rock bottom, I finally understood that clinging to that illusion was costing me more than letting go ever could. I sat at the edge of the bed, watching the sunlight creep through the blinds, and made a quiet promise to myself. This ends now. I will not let my children grow up believing this is what love looks like. Taking action wasn't easy, though. The first step was internal, shifting my mindset from helplessness to determination. I began by writing down what I wanted. Stability for the kids, peace in my own home, and the dignity of knowing I wasn't begging for scraps of attention anymore. That simple act of putting pen to paper gave me a framework, a reminder that this wasn't just about reacting to Lila's choices, it was about making my own. The very next evening, I asked Lila to sit down with me after the kids had gone to bed. She seemed irritated at the request, as though even giving me 10 minutes of her time was a burden. But she sat, arms crossed, eyes distant. I took a deep breath and said, "Lila, I can't keep living like this. You've made it clear that you want something different, that this life isn't enough for you. But I need you to understand something. It's not fair to me, and it's not fair to the kids, for you to keep one foot in this family, while your heart is somewhere else." She rolled her eyes, muttering, "Here we go again," but I pressed on. "No, this isn't another argument, this is a decision. I can't stop you from leaving, and I won't beg you to stay. But I also won't let you drag us through this half-life anymore. If you want to go live for yourself, then do it. But not in this house. Not at the expense of our children." Her expression shifted then, a flash of surprise breaking through her practiced indifference. She had grown used to me, pleading, compromising, trying to bridge the gap. This new firmness caught her off guard. "So what, Mark?" she snapped. "You're kicking me out?" I held her gaze steadily. "I'm asking you to choose. Either you're here with us, fully committed, or you go find whatever it is you're chasing. But this limbo ends now." For once, she had no immediate comeback. She sat in silence, her eyes darting as though searching for words that wouldn't come. Eventually, she stood up and muttered, "I need to think," before walking upstairs. But I didn't chase her. For the first time, I wasn't afraid of her leaving. I was afraid of what would happen if I didn't draw the line. In the days that followed, I began to reclaim small pieces of control. I stopped waiting for her to participate in family activities and started doing them with the kids on my own. We went to the park, we cooked dinner together, we had movie nights. At first it felt strange, like I was compensating for her absence, but soon it became liberating. The kids laughed again, their smiles brighter without the tension of wondering if their mother would show up or not. I also reached out to a lawyer, just to understand my options. It wasn't that I was eager to file papers that instant, but I needed knowledge, and knowledge gave me strength. Sitting in that office, hearing about custody arrangements, financial plans, and legal steps, I felt something shift in me. For the first time, I wasn't reacting to Lila's chaos. I was preparing for a future I could shape myself. Meanwhile, Lila continued her erratic patterns, but something in the dynamic had changed. She noticed my shift, how I no longer tried to stop her from leaving the house or demanded explanations. I had stopped chasing, and that unsettled her. One night, she came home to find me sitting at the dining table with papers spread out, budgets, schedules, plans for the kids. "What's all this?" she asked, her voice tinged with suspicion. "Plans?" I said simply. "For me and the kids, for our life moving forward." She frowned. Without me? I looked up at her, my tone steady. With you, if you want to be here. Without you, if that's your choice. Either way, we're moving forward. That was the moment I saw fear flicker in her eyes, not because she was worried about losing me, but because she realized she no longer held the power to keep me dangling in uncertainty. By the end of that week, the children and I had settled into a rhythm that felt strangely lighter. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't the family life I had envisioned, but it was ours. And more importantly, it was honest. I was no longer pretending that things would magically return to how they once were. I was building something new, something stable, something rooted in truth. Looking back, the decision wasn't just about setting boundaries with Lila. It was about reclaiming myself. For too long, I had allowed her choices to dictate my reality. But the moment I decided that her indecision would no longer define me, everything changed. It was painful, yes, but also liberating. I didn't know then what the exact outcome would be, whether she would leave for good, whether the divorce papers would eventually be signed, or whether she would suddenly decide to recommit, but it didn't matter. Because for the first time in a long time, I wasn't waiting for her decision, I had made my own. And that, more than anything else, was the beginning of taking my life back. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.